Here we go.
All
So,
right.
welcome everybody to this week's podcast. And I'm happy to welcome back my friend Michael Fitzpatrick to our show today for our part 2 of Tuning the Planet. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much.
So, I want to start by saying I did find a Fernet that's not Fernet Branca.
Okay.
And Michael and I have a long history with Fernet that we can't trace. We're not sure why.
No, we don't know.
But cheers to you, brother.
Cheers. Here we go.
Give this a try. It's what I recall from Fernet. It's a little rounder, a little sweeter.
Okay.
Not quite as harsh. I love to mix this with other things. I think on its own, it's a little strong.
Absolutely.
But a good way to start today. So
just remember, for those that are viewing, it's a digestif.
It is a digestif.
That's the whole point, with secret herbs from around the world, and it's been an Italian tradition for centuries.
Yes, it's kind of like an Italian version of chartreuse, which is soon becoming extinct because the monks have decided that they want to go worship or something. I don't know. And they're not going to be making, they stopped making chartreuse, at least not in the volumes that we're used to. So I've asked Michael to provide a musical keynote today for us to give us an example of some of his work. And if you haven't checked out last week's episode, excuse me, check out my YouTube channel, Empowering Musicians, where you can watch last week's episode. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways. And today the universe has said, we are going to take this show as far as we can until Michael's laptop dies, because Michael left his power cord at work. So what's that?
That Michael.
This Michael. Yes, not Michael Fitzpatrick. He is blameless in this. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michael, and the power of the universe and my computer will serve us until for the rest of this show. And I'm sure it will all be the right length and the right amount of energy. So,
right on. So I want to just, when in doubt, play Bach. That's sort of the grounded being, certainly for cello players, with the cello suites, which he wrote between 1722 and 23, they think, in Cothen, Germany, where he was in the court of I think Ferdinand, which means that he was given license to essentially to write whatever he wanted to write. I mean, there was certain stuff he had to do for rituals and so forth, but the suites are mysterious, to put it mildly. And I was told as a child, oh, the Bach cello suites, the Bach cello suites. And I got to the conservatory, oh, the Bach cello suites. And I didn't get it, right? Because they sounded still like study pieces. Pablo Casal's is the gold standard. And the way he plays them from his heart and from his intuition. So the rhythm tends to modulate, if you will. It accelerates, it decelerates. He lingers on certain notes. The oft maligned word of rubato, which sounds almost pejorative nowadays. But what he was doing was he was following what he intuited and intellectually felt was where the line was actually going. But as Buckminster Fuller said, the shortest distance between 2 points is not a straight line. It's actually an arc. How that makes any sense to us, it doesn't make any sense to the mind. But along the way, I think it was in large measure because of modern technology and reverb and delay, I started plugging in and started hearing a much larger reverberant space. And then one night, speaking of monasteries, I was in a remote, very famous monastery in Kentucky called the Abbey of Gethsemane, which has a 6-second throw. Okay. And I was playing the 6 suites saraband, which is really complicated because you have to, on the cello, you have to play broken chords. You can't do it like on the piano where you simply play the chord. So I'm playing these broken chords, and Brother Paul, who was sort of the resident poet monk there, was going around the abbey lighting candles and burning frankincense. And it was midnight and the lights were down. And I started playing these chords. And as I would go on to the next chord, the first chord in its 6-second delay was echoing back. And then it revealed this architecture of other harmonies that were obviously in Bach's head. Wow. Why do we know this? Because back then, they didn't play in carpeted living rooms. They played these pieces in cathedrals. That was their sound system, right? That's all been lost, forgotten, buried in history. So I thought, okay, how do you unlock that time dimension, like where I'm sitting now, which is in the design lab of my studio space where I do graphics and so forth. And it's not a resonant space at all. I don't have my amp. I don't have my reverb. But what I'm going to do with intention is to put myself back in that cathedral space. And I'm going to play the Saraband from the third suite, which is much technically easier. But none of them are easy, right? Because the deeper you go into them, the more meaning that's hidden gets unlocked. And what I found recently, as esoteric as it sounds, is he put locks or kind of trap doors or gates where if you figure out how to unlock it, you literally go into different time dimensions.
Wow.
And it's okay as long as you come back to the original ground of being that you started. So this is the third suite Saraband. I'm not going to do the repeats, which won't allow me to really take them out, but I'll do my best to give a demonstration of what I mean by this. It's time travel. Okay.
Right. Wow. Okay.
And I think we talked about this last week. I'm not totally sure, but the key to me in the whole deal is silence. Right? And if we don't start from the silence, we have a chaotic field where we have a chaotic listening field. But once the silence gets presenced or invoked, the audience has to comport. Right? They have no choice. And from that, then the first notes can sound.
Yeah, I just love that kind of music for just putting you in a really meditative sort of contemplative state so quickly. It's such a magical experience. And I love the fact that when you play Bach that way, and Bach is like, really flexible in that respect. Like you can do that with it, where you can still feel like what the meter is,
Mhm.
but you're out of time at the same time. It's so cool. And if you play those pieces in time, they don't work. Like they don't really sound right.
They sound absolutely boring.
Yeah.
And there's no way that he wanted it to sound boring, right? Why would he have written it? That's not the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, in my career, which has been very strange and all over the map, right? I've had times when I've played full time. I've had times when I've not played hardly at all, and I always come back to like if you're a French horn player, you know, we're not going to necessarily play the Coprache etudes because they're horrible and dull.
Mhm.
So I would always play Bach cello suites
Oh,
on,
really? Cool.
and I would play them in the original key
Mhm.
because there are some transcriptions.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just like, you know, it's so much more satisfying than just playing an etude or something, you know, because there's so much music in there
Mhm.
um, to work with. So, what have you found when you've done these kind of performances for folks? What is the reaction of people who are not musicians and who just maybe are coming to this new?
Great question. One of the things, I mean, speaking of strange careers, I've, you know, been there in the weirdest of places.
Yeah,
I played in barns. I played in the subways. I played in a Greek nightclub and a Greek bouzouki band. I think we talked about ragtime orchestras, symphony orchestras, solos with symphony orchestras, rock bands, what I would call sort of fusion ensembles. Um, and what I started realizing was, all right, look, we don't have the luxury and the privilege of those that came before us in our previous generation, which ultimately is the Woodstock generation, where classical music was still in the mainstream, right? It wasn't down to the 0.001% that it is now. It was probably at 25 or 30%, right? So I'm thinking of French horn players. I don't know a whole lot, but Dennis Brain, people like
yeah,
that could have a solo career. Um,
exactly.
my great classmate from Northwestern, Eric Rusk, who I'm sure you know, who was, I mean, I used to sit in the practice room next to Eric just to listen to him breathe.
Yeah,
You could feel the walls expanding, and then this sound would come out of that horn that it was of the gods. And I thought, I want that, right?
yeah,
So it became clear to me if I wanted to carve a path that didn't exist, it was going to be one that took the music out to the people that really hadn't been exposed to the cello all that much or had a negative impression of it. Many times I would play a house concert, for example, or in a unity church, and there would be a kid there that, you know, 8 years old, and they were like, "Oh, I hate the cello. I can't stand," you know, they would say this beforehand, like it was they had this prejudice against it. And then afterwards, they'd come up and they'd, you know, be sort of fascinated. I said, "Well, what did you think?" They were like, "Oh, it was awesome," you know, but
yeah,
it had to do with the proximity also of them being able to see what probably showed up on the camera just now. There's breathing going on. There's an intensity. There's a wrestling with it.
yeah,
So I came to this commitment, which was, if this isn't accessible to everyone, forget the establishment, right? Because they've got their own prejudices,
right.
right? That were locked in because of their teachers, and the technology which enabled, you know, note perfection.
Hmm.
So I played at a fabulous venue, if you ever need a place to stay in Washington, D.C., called the Mansion on O Street, which is this 100-room Escher house with, it's like a
Wow.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, bohemian style.
Wow.
And my friends own it, and they've sort of made me artist in residence. But the deal is I play a concert, you
Yeah.
know, a couple times a year. So some people came that had told me, this one woman in particular, she told me she was a Bach aficionado. And she was, you know, listing all the cello suites recordings that she knew, which, you know, it was a long list.
Yeah.
All right, well, the pressure's on. So I sat down and I put that out of my mind. and I played in a similar way that I just played that saraband. I just went for it. And she came up to me afterwards, and to me, the metric is always, is there more light shining out of their eyes than when we started?
Right.
And if there is, it goes back to what I was talking about last week with the two sound molecules that meet at 90-degree angle and then they turn into light. Okay. All right. So it's a physical phenomenon. So she came up to me and she sort of babbled. Right?
Yeah.
I said, is everything okay?
Yeah.
And she said, I've never heard the sweets until now. I didn't know that all of that stuff was in there. I took it as the highest compliment you can get.
Yeah.
All right. So just one other anecdote. I was playing in the subways the hot summer of 1989. And the Greek nightclub gig had gone kerflooey. The club had closed. I'd taken all the money to buy the golden cello. And now I needed to pay off. There was a remaining balance. I heard you could make good money in the subways. So I go down to the Lincoln Center stop. First weekend, I made hundreds of dollars. Right? As the summer dwindled on, the shows at Lincoln, the summer season's over. There's nothing happening, so there wasn't that many people coming through. And one night, I was really depressed, like down on my luck, thinking, "How am I going to get out of here?" And this black guy came through the turnstiles, and he had this fabulous outfit. It was a floppy hat, about 20 gold chains. And he shouted at me from about 50 feet. He said, "No, man, you can't play it like that. You got to put some soul into it." Like, how is it possible that this guy that's not from the conservatory system is telling me something that nobody in the conservatory system ever said to me? And so it jolted me. It really, I felt like he hit me with like, wake up. And so I just started jamming out on it. And as he walked past me, he goes, "You'll be all right. You'll be all right." Right. So I was like, okay, there's a switch somewhere that once you learn how to switch it on, then it will reach an audience that has never heard this stuff before. Right. And as long as it has nothing to do with culture, age, anything, it has to do with the ear. And if I don't let the phrase uncoil as it did, I'll never play it again that way. I have no idea what I did, right? But I know that I was listening. Sometimes it feels like there's like a tube that comes down that hooks into my ear. And then it feels like the notes are piping in and the timing of the notes are piping in. And so I've just learned, play what I'm hearing. And obviously you have to have mastery of your instrument enough so that you can pull that off. But that then it makes it an ecstatic experience for me, or a mystical experience for me every single time. And I'm clear, if I'm having that experience, the audience is having that experience because we're entrained in the space that came out of the silence.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's so profound. And, it's something that we can lose track of in a classical training system where we're just trying to perfect our skill. And then sometimes, like I can get into a mindset if I'm practicing for an audition where I'm like, wait a minute, Michael, you're making no music here. All you're doing is you're playing like a machine.
Right.
And you're right, that doesn't reach people. And I think the people that you're playing for, like, they don't care if you're perfect. They care if you're reaching them and if you're saying something.
That's right.
Which is so profound, I think.
Mm.
So you're in our last minutes here, you're have a project called Tuning the Planet. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Well, it all came out of my 6 days that I originally spent with the Dalai Lama in the aforementioned Abbey of Gethsemane Monastery, which was kind of like as odd as it sounds, the Super Bowl of monks and nuns from East and West coming together, essentially to try and say, look, this is how we do it from our tradition. How do you guys do it from yours? And then it was like, is there common ground that we could sort of fuse together and make the world a better place? Right? I mean, plain and simple. That was the whole purpose. I'm the wild card. I'm cello boy that gets pulled into this thing, right? And I didn't know. I'd never been around 50 monks and nuns, and these weren't just like random. These were like the all-stars,
Right.
led by the Dalai Lama. So when it ended, I got invited by his office and the office essentially of the Vatican, which was over the monks and nuns of the Christian Gnostic tradition, to create a musical recording that would essentially be an emanation of. It was a very felt energy of compassion. Like people say compassion, we think it's a mental thing, but it was like you could feel that vibe. Like you'd have to be a moron to have missed that vibe, right? It was you could reach into it. It was like that awful humidity down in New Orleans when we were there. You know, you could part it.
Right.
So I thought, well, Jesus, I think I'm just being asked to or commissioned to create the world premiere CD of the Dalai Lama. It's like,
Wow.
I don't know, man. And I had the Broadway tour of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoats coming up. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do both of these things simultaneously, but I'm saying yes. I just took a leap. But I thought, we can't do this inside of a recording studio in New York City, right? That's not what this is. And I was like, okay, what are the elements? Tibetan chant, Gregorian chant from the Catholic Trappist monks, standard classical gems like Ravel's Pavan, Fauré's Pia Jesu, and spoken word. And so my concept model was Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, because that was the album that changed my life, right?
Okay.
But I didn't mention that to them. So I didn't think they would get the reference. And I was like, where are we going to do this? Where can we do this where nobody has an advantage over anyone else, and that it draws us into a deeper depth? And growing up in Kentucky, you as a kid, you take field trips to Mammoth Cave, which is the largest cave system in the world. It's 400 miles of cave. And I said, I'll only do it under one condition. You have to let us record it inside a Mammoth Cave. And they said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So I was like, wow, they can see the vision. So it took 3 years of pre-production when it was supposed to take 9 months. I learned about how to write a diplomatic missive to the private office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and essentially to the Vatican representatives. And I was coached on how to do this, and it was insane.
Wow.
Right? And felt like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters. I was like building that thing in the sink, and I didn't totally understand, but I knew the cave held the secrets. So we did the recording. The album came out called Compassion. But we also filmed everything. So for the last 20 years, I'm not a filmmaker, but I was like, we gotta nowadays, people don't know how to, we don't listen to stuff anymore. And we certainly don't listen to 53 minutes uninterrupted, right? That's just not the way we process it.
Right.
But we watch streaming movies on Amazon, right? So I thought, okay, we've already got the soundtrack. We did it in reverse. We didn't make a movie and score it. We made an album and then created the visuals for it.
Wow.
So it was originally called Compassion because I had certain political, diplomatic, I had to wrap my arms around everyone.
Yeah.
But then I thought, we're in a different time now, tuning the planet. All right, that's cool. The planet, I just came up with this phrase the other day, which was I picked it from a news piece. We've entered the time of global boiling. We're past global warming, right? We're in global boiling now. It's code red. What can we possibly do, right? And all we can do as musicians is put that vibe out and touch people's hearts and their minds, and hopefully that will propel people to do. It's way beyond recycling, but ultimately to become more humane towards each other, so that as potential climate crises continue, we can come together, right? Which I'm a child of the civil rights movement. So Dr. King was my hero. And it's like, we will either come together or we will perish as fools.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the coin toss right now. So the whole plan of tuning the planet, the movie with the soundtrack. My co-producer is Academy Award winner Maria Florio, who's 78 and is just a genius and an unstoppable force. And so she's mentored me. And okay, how do you do this? How do you make the narrative work if you've never heard of the Dalai Lama, you've never heard Tibetan chant, you don't know anything about caves, right? How do you make it work? And the solution, the creative solution, I always like to say, it's not obstacles, they're design challenges.
Yeah.
And you have the opportunity for a design solution, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, which usually comes out of some kind of a leap of logic, some sort of intuitive aha, right? Some light bulb going off. So what we decided to do was to make the whole viewing experience, which is only going to be 53 minutes, which is the length of the CD, maybe with an intro, just to kind of set it up. But to make it, if you remember the films Baraka or Koyaanisqatsi, they're hypnagogic,
yeah,
in a sense, plotless. This isn't plotless, but it has to be like a shamanic induction where we take people into the heart of the earth. And the whole premise was, if we went into the heart of the earth, and if we were listening to what the earth's message was, right?
Yeah.
We didn't understand the message was going to literally come through the frequencies and the tones. So it was like, okay, cool. So that's what Tuning the Planet is this voyage into the earth, into the cave of our heart, right? With, like Plato's cave, you finally come out of the cave and you see the light, and it's like, wow, I didn't know this whole other reality was here, right? So that's the grand vision, Tuning the Planet. It's featured on my website. There's a Tuning the Planet link on michaelfitzpatrick.com, and it's in production. And we're in the, in the 20 years. They always say, oh, James Cameron, it took him 20 years to make Avatar. I was maligned when it wasn't finished in 10 or 13, and people gave up on it. I just never gave up on it, because I'm like, we haven't finished it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's part of the next phase that I'm engaged in.
Well, that sounds really exciting, and I can't wait to see that film when it comes out, Tuning the Planet. And what you mentioned, Koyaanisqatsi. It's funny, when I first saw that movie, I think it was on like a VCR tape. Like, that's how old I am. And I was so blown away by it that I rewound it and I watched the entire film like a second time in the same sitting. And Gottfried Reggio was the filmmaker.
Remember, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, I love that reference. So I can't wait to see your film. Cool. And thank you so much for sharing your musical keynote today with us. And I'm going to wrap up before my computer dies on me.
Good time.
And Michael Fitzpatrick, it's been a pleasure. And you can find Michael at michaelfitzpatrick.com. And I will look forward to another musical keynote sometime down the road, hopefully live.
Yeah, let's do it.
And we'll have to make music together sometime. We've never done that outside of Miss Saigon, which doesn't count.
That's mesh netting and all.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Michael, and thank you again for sharing your time with us today. And I will look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thank you so much, Michael.